Salam, peace be upon you. We are standing in a library that has no end. Not the kind of library with shelves you can reach and a ceiling you can see. This one keeps unfolding as you walk. Every time you think you've reached the last corridor, a new hallway quietly appears, lined with books you didn't know existed. And yet, there is something strange about this library. Every book, every shelf, every corridor, no matter how far you go, has been written with the same alphabet. Not a new alphabet in the deeper wings, not secret letters hidden from ordinary readers. The same few letters, rearranged, combined, refined. The deeper books are not written in a different language. They are written in the same language at higher resolution. That is the feeling we need to install in part 14. Because by now we have done something dangerous and beautiful. We began from undifferentiated phi, not a substance, not an energy, not a field living inside spacetime. A single permission token. Phi, a mapping from the minimal support X to the circle S1. We refused absolute phase. We accepted only what survives relabeling. We learned the lift discipline. Phi tilde, a local unwrapping on lift valid patches, mapping from a patch to the real line, and only meaningful up to whole turn shifts. We defined the first derivative stem, A equals d phi tilde. We named triunity as a strict readout law. Omega, kappa, nu are three inseparable projections of that single stem A. They are not separate primitives. They must always recombine. We installed finite jets as the alphabet. The n jet, j n phi, the finite derivative stack up to order n at a point, on domains licensed for that depth. We froze public local sentence form. Every local statement must be cast as O of x equals f of j and phi of x, on a declared domain, obeying invariance, and typed by its jet order and domain. We installed transformation grammar. When descriptions change on overlaps, different charts, different local spellings, jets transform by the chain rule. Meaning is the equivalence class that survives the translation. We climbed into second order. How change changes, the second jet layer, where bending and curvature live as constraints inside J2 phi, not as imported forces. And now we arrive at part 14, the part that prevents the entire language from being misunderstood forever. Because the moment you show people a ladder, many will assume the ladder adds new worlds at each rung. They will say, first derivative is motion, second derivative is force, third derivative is something else, and so on, as if each rung introduces a new substance into reality. Holophase refuses that move at language level. Higher derivatives are not new substances. They are final questions about the same phi. They refine the sentence. They do not add new nouns. That is the central vow of this part. Higher jet refinement with no new ontology. And we have to make it not just correct, but unforgettable. So let me begin with something you can see. You are looking at a human face from far away. From a distance, you can tell it is a face. You can tell the person is smiling or not. That's the zeroth layer, the broad picture. Then you come closer. Now you see the edges, where the cheek meets the shadow, where the eyelid curves. That is like first derivatives. Change patterns, slopes, gradients, the first whisper of structure. Then you come closer still. Now you see the fine bending, the subtle curvature of the lip, the way the smile is asymmetrical, the way the skin folds. That is like second derivatives, how the change itself changes. Then you go closer again. Now you see pores, tiny textures, micro creases. The skin has its own landscape. That's higher derivatives, finer and finer questions of variation. At no point did the face become a different kind of object. At no point did you need to invent a new primitive called pore force or crease substance. You only changed the resolution of the question you were asking. This is what higher jets are: changing the resolution of the question, not changing the ontology. And now I want you to carry a second image in your mind, because it is even closer to the holophase spirit. Imagine you are listening to a piece of music. At first, you can only hear the melody. That's the simplest description. Then you listen again and you notice the rhythm, cadence. That's one projection. Then you listen again and you notice the harmony, texture. That's another projection. Then you listen again and you notice the way the sound moves around the room, transport. That's the third projection. But those were always there. Your hearing became literate. The music did not suddenly gain new instruments. Now, once you can hear melody, rhythm, harmony, and transport, you can listen deeper still. You can notice vibrato, micro changes in pitch. You can notice how the vibrato itself changes, tightening, loosening. You can notice the way a note's onset sharpens or softens. You can notice the curvature of the phrase, the turning points where the singer begins to descend. That is higher jet refinement. The same music, heard with deeper derivative literacy. Nothing new is added to reality. Only the question becomes finer. That is part 14. Now we must say it in the language. A finite jet of order n is the package of derivatives up to depth n of the lifted phase phi tilde at a point, on a domain typed Cn. In simple words, everything we can legally say about phi locally, up to n layers of how it changes. But the crucial thing is this: n is always finite. The ladder is infinite in principle, but we speak in finite sentences. That is not a limitation of the language, it is the discipline that makes it public. Because infinite as a completed object is too slippery to be a primitive token. Infinity can appear as a limit concept later, in careful contexts, but the language itself speaks in finite jets. So when we say higher jets, we mean higher finite jet orders. J3 phi, J4 phi, J5 phi, and so on. Each is a deeper finite slice of the infinite derivative tree. Now, this is where the breathtaking beauty appears. The triunity law does not weaken as you climb. It strengthens. At every order, the same one stem is being refined, and the three readouts refined together. Higher order cadence structure. Higher order texture structure. Higher order transport structure. But still one phi. Still one A as the first derivative stem from which the readouts arise. Still one language. If you ever find yourself speaking as if omega has higher derivatives that exist independently of kappa and nu, you have already left the language. Because omega, kappa, nu are not separate towers beside A. They are readouts of A. So their higher refinements are readouts of higher jet structure. And they must remain recomposable back into the same underlying jet package. This is the constant reminder. Triunity is always. Now let's install the 4 gates for this part as living hygiene. First, the well-formedness gate for higher jets. Higher order sentences remain finite jet sentences. This is not negotiable. If someone tries to speak using an infinite jet as a primitive, the language treats that as a category mistake. Not because infinite depth doesn't exist in principle, but because a public sentence must have a finite declared depth. So every time you hear a claim, you can ask one simple question. What jet order is it speaking? If it does not answer, it is not a sentence in this language. This is how the language remains checkable and honest. It never pretends to have accessed unlimited depth. Second, the invariance gate. Higher jet claims must remain invariant under all equivalences and overlap rules. And this becomes more important as you climb, not less. Because the higher you go, the more opportunities there are to confuse coordinate artifacts with genuine structure. A badly chosen chart can make a third derivative look dramatic. A distorted parameterization can create fake jerks and fake snap in your description. The way a badly stretched map can make a straight road look curved. So higher jet structure is only meaningful insofar as it survives translation. Chart changes, lift sheet changes, gauge shifts, and overlap composition. Meaning is never the raw numbers. Meaning is the equivalence class that survives the transformation grammar. Third, the domain gate. Higher jet sentences require appropriate CN typing. You cannot speak third derivatives on a domain that is only C2. You cannot speak 10th derivatives where only second derivatives exist. This is not pedantry. This is the moral core of the language. Do not claim what you have not licensed. And notice the consequence. The universe may speak different depths in different places. In some regions, phi may be smooth, and you can climb high in the jet ladder. In other regions, defect, discontinuities, or roughness may stop you at low order. The language doesn't panic about that. It simply tells the truth. In this region, this is the depth of the alphabet we can legally read. Fourth, the non-encodability challenge. Any new kind proposal must reduce to invariant constraints on jets and topology or be rejected. This gate becomes the great purifier as we climb. Because as you climb higher, you can invent endless new names. You can look at a fourth derivative pattern and call it a new entity. You can look at a mixed fifth derivative and call it a new field. You can label every feature of the jet tower as a separate being. Holophase refuses that fragmentation. It insists that new nouns are not permitted simply because new patterns appear. A pattern is not a primitive. A pattern is a word spelled from the alphabet. If someone proposes a new primitive category, they must show that it cannot be expressed as any finite jet or topological invariant of phi. If they cannot, the language says, you have discovered a derived concept, not a new primitive. This is the minimalism that gives the language its power. Now, let's deepen the intuition. What does it feel like to climb the higher jet ladder? At first order, we asked, how does phi change? At second order, we asked, how does that change? At third order, we ask, how does the bending itself bend? At fourth, how does that evolve? And so on. You may have heard common names in everyday life. Position, velocity, acceleration, jerk, snap, crackle, pop. People sometimes joke with serial names after the first few. The point is not the names. The point is that the ladder continues without end, and every rung is a finer question about variation. But in holophase, we do not treat these as separate kinds of reality. They are deeper questions about one reality. This is why the language feels intelligent. It anticipates infinite describability without requiring infinite primitives. Now I want to place a visual image in your mind that you can carry into every later episode. The phi tree. Picture a single trunk, phi. Now picture the first branching, the first derivative stem A, which is the readable change of phi on lift-valid domains. From that stem, the triunity readout appears. Three inseparable shadows: cadence, texture, transport. Omega, kappa, nu. Not separate trees, one tree with three consistent projections. Now picture that every one of these shadows can be refined, not by splitting into new primitive branches, but by asking finer questions about how the stem changes. So the tree grows upward. Second derivatives, third derivatives, mixed derivatives. A branching fractal of derivative questions. And crucially, each level of the tree is still one language, one alphabet, one grammar. The richness comes not from adding new letters, but from combining and refining the same ones. This is the promise of part 14. Infinite refinement, finite sentences, no ontology inflation. Now we must say something carefully about infinite describability. It would be easy to turn this into a mystical claim, that the universe is infinite and therefore unknowable, or that deeper always exists and therefore nothing is stable. Holophase refuses that mood. Holophase is not despair, it is discipline. It says, the ladder is infinite in principle, but we are finite beings, and public knowledge requires finite windows. So we speak in finite jets and declare domains. This creates a beautiful balance. The language is bottomless in principle, but every actual claim is made at a declared depth and a declared domain. This is not weakness. It is the structure that makes science possible. Now I want to show you how this principle solves a problem that has haunted physics for centuries: the temptation to reify approximations. In many old frameworks, we treat a low-order model as if it were reality itself. We treat position and velocity as if they are the whole truth. And then we are shocked when we need acceleration. We treat acceleration as if it is the whole truth. And then we are shocked when higher order effects appear. Holophase says, of course higher orders appear. They were always allowed in the language. You simply chose a smaller alphabet for your sentence. So the right posture is not shock. The right posture is, what is the jet order of our current sentence, and what happens when we refine it? This turns mysteries into refinements. It turns new forces into new constraints at higher jet order. It turns anomalies into signals that our sentence depth or domain was mismatched. And it gives you a systematic way to climb without changing your ontology every time. Now let's ground this in more analogies across scales, because the listener must feel it in their bones. Think of handwriting. You can recognize a person's handwriting from far away. That's core structure. But if you zoom in, you see micropatterns. Pressure variations, tiny tremors, the way the pen lifts and returns. Those micropatterns can distinguish twins, can reveal fatigue, can show emotion. Yet they were all written with the same pen by the same hand. Higher jets are like those micropatterns, deeper signatures inside the same act of writing. Think of DNA. At one level, DNA is a sequence of letters, A, C, G, T. That's a discrete alphabet. But the same DNA can be read at higher resolution. How it folds, how it twists, how it supercoils, how proteins bind, how expression varies over time. At each level, you are not adding a new biological substance. You are asking finer questions about the same molecule. Holophase is similar. The sequence is the phase assignment, and the higher jets are the refinements of how that assignment varies. Think of a city. From a satellite, you see roads and blocks. That's low-order structure. From street level, you see traffic flow. That's change patterns. From minute to minute, you see how traffic flow changes. Jams, wave-like stop-and-go patterns. That's second-order structure. From day to day, you see how those patterns evolve. Construction, habits, seasonal changes. Higher-order structure. The city did not gain a new substance called traffic force. The same city exhibits deeper patterns when you ask deeper questions. Now, the whole reason we are doing episode 13b is because we cannot begin differentiation or cosmogenesis until the listener knows the language. So, part 14 must clearly say, once, in plain terms, we are freezing the alphabet and grammar here, so we cannot cheat later. And higher jet refinement is one of the most common ways people cheat, by smuggling in new primitives when they simply needed deeper derivatives. So part 14 is the firewall against that. Now we must also state the formal prediction and falsifier of this part. The prediction is austere and profound. The universe has infinite describability in principle, but no new primitives are needed, only deeper jet questions. In other words, you can keep refining your description by climbing to higher jet order, and you will uncover richer structure, but you will not be forced to introduce a fundamentally new category of being just to talk about it. Your nouns remain stable, your sentences become finer, and the falsifier is equally sharp. Exhibit a necessary primitive category that cannot be expressed as any finite jet or topological invariant of phi. Not a preference, not a convenience, necessary. Something that cannot be encoded as any invariant, any constraint, any functional of J and phi on any declared domain, and cannot be captured by topological tokens like winding, holonomy, defect charges, and their composition rules. If such a category exists, holophase must expand its PS0 vocabulary. The language must admit a new primitive. But the burden is heavy because the language is already extremely expressive. It contains local refinement through jets and global discreteness through topology. So part 14 is not a boast, it is a challenge. If you want more primitives, prove you need them. Now we should also guard against the opposite mistake, the temptation to treat higher jets as automatically better. The language does not say higher is always better. It says higher is finer. But finer is not always more useful. Sometimes, a low-order sentence is the correct sentence because it is stable, public, and robust under small changes. Higher-order descriptions can be sensitive, they can be noisy, they can require higher regularity typing that is not available everywhere. They can be illegal on domains where the structure is rough. So holophase is not a cult of higher derivatives. It is a discipline of appropriate depth. This matters because we are building a language for public science, not private fantasy. A public sentence must not only be expressible, it must be well-formed, invariant, and domain-licensed. So even though the latter goes to infinity, we choose the rung appropriate for the region and the claim. This is where the language begins to feel like ethics, not moral ethics, epistemic ethics. Do not speak beyond your license. Do not confuse your coordinate spelling with meaning. Do not invent new nouns when you can refine existing sentences. Now let me show you something subtle and beautiful about the triunity at higher order. At low order, people often think of time, space, and motion as separate containers. Then they connect them with equations. Holophase reverses that. It says, there is one derivative stem, A, and time, space, and motion are readouts. They are shadows of a single structure. At higher order, this becomes even more inescapable, because the mixed derivatives encode how these shadows braid. For example, when you take higher derivatives, you inevitably get terms that look like change along time of a spatial change, or spatial variation of a temporal cadence, and so on. Those are mixed terms. In ordinary language, people often treat these as exotic coupling terms, as if nature is mixing time and space. Holophase says, there was never a clean separation to begin with. The mixing is what appears when you choose a decomposition and then refine. The underlying object was always unified. So the triunity law becomes a constant coherence test. If you claim a higher order feature exists purely in omega without affecting kappa and nu, you are likely confusing a projection with a structural invariant. The correct question is always, can your claimed feature be rewritten in neutral jet language, and does it survive chart changes and recomposition back to A? That is what keeps triunity alive at every rung. Now, because this is part 14, we should gently climb with the listener to feel the infinity without drowning them. So imagine the ladder briefly, up to a few steps, not as symbols, but as intuition. At first, we have phi, the mark on the circle assigned to events. Then A, the first differential whisper, how the mark shifts locally. Then second order, how that whisper bends. Then third order, how the bending itself varies, a kind of shape of shape. Then fourth order, how that variation varies. We do not need to name these as separate physical beings. They are successive refinements of the same question. How does phi vary? And importantly, at each rung, we can stop. We can say, this is our sentence depth for this claim. And if the world demands more, we can climb one rung higher, without rewriting our ontology from scratch. This is the elegance. Now let me return to the library image and sharpen it. In many sciences, people confuse vocabulary growth with ontology growth. They think, if I coin a new word, I have discovered a new thing. Holophase says, not necessarily. A new word can simply be a new combination of existing letters. When you climb to higher jets, your vocabulary becomes richer, but your alphabet has not changed. Your ontology has not changed. Your descriptions become more precise, not more crowded. This is an antidote to the primitive tower, the habit of stacking more and more fundamental objects under the world until the foundation becomes a myth. Holophase stays grounded, one primitive, infinite refinement. Now we close by sealing the carry-forward sentence that must remain in the listener. Here it is. Higher derivatives are not new substances. They are finer questions about phi. They refine what a sentence can say. They do not add new nouns. Every higher order claim must remain a finite jet claim on a domain typed for that depth, invariant under all allowed redescriptions, triunity coherent through recomposition back to A, and hostile to primitive inflation through the non-encodability challenge. And we step into the next part with a natural bridge. Because once you accept higher jet refinement without new ontology, the next question becomes inevitable. If the alphabet can refine without end, where do genuinely discrete, stable things come from? Things that do not blur as you refine, things that persist across scales. That is where topology and defects begin to dominate the story again. The smooth ladder can refine forever, but the universe also has knots, wrappings that cannot be smoothed away, integers that do not change when you zoom. So the next movement is to weave the infinite ladder of jets with the discrete backbone of topology, and to show how stable objects and identities can be read as patterns that survive both refinement and translation. But that is for the next part. For now, we stand in the infinite library, and we understand the discipline that makes the whole library readable. No matter how deep the shelves go, the alphabet does not change. Only the questions become finer. Only the sentences become sharper. And that is not a limitation. That is the signature of a language intelligent enough to describe reality without ever needing to invent a second reality beneath it. Always. Peace be upon you.